So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're all having a good day and you're staying warm. My name is Ben Dancer and I work at Mentor Canada as our manager of quality mentoring and capacity building, and I'll be your host for today. We are very fortunate to be joined by Dr. Beverly-Jean Daniel for today's visiting expert conversation focused on mentoring for Black children and youth in Canada. Beverly-Jean's commitment to the well-being of Black children and youth is really evident in everything that she does. I've had the pleasure of working with her on a few projects and just meeting with her to plan today's presentation. And she truly has dedicated her professional and personal career to supporting Black children and youth in the work that she does. So I think today we're in for a very useful and practical conversation. Before we begin, Mentor Canada respectfully acknowledges that the lands upon which we operate are the traditional territories of the respective First Nations, Métis Nations, and Inuit, who are the longtime stewards of those lands. I invite you all to please participate in today's conversation. These events truly are much more useful and impactful when people get engaged and ask questions. So if you're willing, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your organization, and what you're hoping to learn today, what drove you to attend today's presentation. Also, very excitingly, one participant will be gifted a free copy of Beverly-Jean Daniel's latest book. We'll be drawing a random name from the participant list later on, and we hope to announce that after Beverly-Jean's presentation. So stay tuned for that. You might get a free copy of her book. And of course, today's event will be recorded as always, and we'll share it to everyone who registered if they weren't able to attend today. But take-home message, please participate, ask your questions and really engage so we can all learn from and with one another. If you are new to Mentor Canada, maybe this is one of your first events with us, welcome. We are a national registered charity focused on scaling and accelerating world-class mentoring across Canada. We do that in many different ways, through research, through technology, through capacity building support, through convening like our national community of practice, and many other ways. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can, of course, visit our website at mentorcanada.ca or send one of us an email if you want to set up a meeting to talk about how we can work and collaborate with one another. So we have 3 items on our agenda today. I'm going to start by just briefly talking about the Visiting Expert Series, what it is, what it entails. I'll then turn it over to Dr. Beverly-Jean Daniel to present some of her research and her ideas and strategies for supporting Black children and youth. And then, of course, we'll have a Q&A with you, the audience. So please, as we're going, put your questions in the chat for Beverly-Jean or jot them down and have them ready when she's done her presentation. So if this is your first Visiting Expert series, these are basically live discussions with experts in the field of mentoring. Historically, they have been researchers, but sometimes we also have practitioners or advocates or anyone really just kind of working in this field to support quality mentoring for children and youth across Canada. And what's exciting is they create tailored presentations for our community, for the Canadian context. A lot of research on mentoring and practice is done in the States and elsewhere, so it's nice to have a dedicated space for us to learn how to do this in Canada. And if you become a member of our national community of practice, you can actually let us know experts that you think would be really helpful for us to listen and learn from, or even suggest general topics that you'd like us to go out and find an expert in. So it's really kind of meant to invite your voice into the community as well. Here is some of the people who have been our experts in the past. I think it's been a pretty impressive roster of folks. So we had Dr. Bernadette Sanchez come in to talk about cultural humility and anti-racism in mentoring relationships. Next, we had Dr. Michael Karcher talk about peer mentoring for the 21st century. A really wonderful one was with Dr. Christian Rummel, where he spoke about effective mentoring strategies for 2S LGBTQIA plus youth. We had Dr. Tina Starlight come in lately to talk about culturally relevant mentoring for Indigenous youth. And we had Dr. David Yeager come in to talk about the science of motivating Gen Z. Some of you might know Dr. Yeager from his book, 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. Really wonderful talk as well. And then our most recent visiting expert was with Doctors Christian Jones, Grace Gowdy, and Aisha Griffith, where they presented and spoke about their youth mentoring model that is really designed to center youth equity in the work that we do. So if you're interested in any of these presentations, they're all available on our YouTube. Just type in Mentor Canada YouTube and you can watch the recordings. Or please join the National Community of Practice and you'll be alerted to all of the upcoming events. We have other events within the National Community of Practice as well. So you can scan that QR code there, which will bring you to qualitymentoring.ca, or you can just type into Google or your whatever web browser you use, qualitymentoring.ca, and you can join for free. So without further ado, that brings me to today's presentation and today's expert, which is, of course, Dr. Beverly-Jean Daniel, who is an associate professor in the School of Child and Youth Care at Toronto Metropolitan University. She developed the anti-Black racism curriculum and training material for the City of Toronto's Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. She also developed a program called The Bridge, which is a mentoring program for African, Black, and Caribbean post-secondary students. And of course, she just recently released a book titled We Were Not Meant to Break, Racially Affirming Care for Black Children, Families, and Communities, which, again, one of you lucky people will be able to walk away with today with a free gifted copy. So if you haven't already, please check out Dr. Daniel's book. There's the QR code, which will bring you to the official publisher's website where you can purchase a copy for you and your team. But again, if you can't or don't want to scan that QR code, you can just Google Dr. Beverly-Jean Daniel and or the title of her book, and it will pop up and you can purchase a copy. So with all of that housekeeping out of the way, it's now time to turn it over to Dr. Beverly-Jean Daniel, which I hope is in the room and ready to present. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen.
Good afternoon, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. So nice to see you. So nice to see everybody here, and thank you all for joining me. So I am now going to, and by way of explanation, I'm not in my at my home office. So normally I have two screens where I could see people and share my screen. I'm working off a laptop today, so please forgive me. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now, and if you can please confirm whether or not you can see my screen. Are folks able to see my screen?
We can't see it yet, no.
Can't, okay. Shoots, 1 second here.
And we can monitor the chat and all the questions, Beverly, so you can just focus on the presentation and we'll handle that.
All right, no problem. Let me just tinker here a little bit. Oh, boy. You know, when you're so accustomed to working in particular ways, and once something shifts, It just feels off. Oh, there we go. Okay. All
Okay,
right.
we
Excellent. Perfect. I hope you're seeing the right screen and not um, stuff in the back.
we're seeing some of the stuff in the back. If
Yeah, once I go to
yeah,
play, it should be okay. How's that?
it's good. If you get rid of that pop-up window,
There
yeah.
we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, so again, my name is Beverly-Jean Daniel, and so I'm going to talk about mentoring today. And it's interesting because I started looking at my data, and in the process of doing that, I had this aha moment. It's like, wait a minute. I had gone to Kenya about 4 years ago and had collected some data there on post-secondary students, and, and an aspect of that was also on mentoring. So what I thought I would do today is to integrate both of those data sets to see what were the similarities, what were the differences, and particularly since we were talking about mentoring Black students. I thought, is there a difference in terms of the experiences of students who are in a predominantly Black space versus students who are in a predominantly white space? So, what you're seeing today is some integration of the data that I have from these two populations. Okay. Um, so I'm just going to minimize this here. So again, as I said, my two research contexts were Ontario, which was focused on sort of structural stressors and institutional stewardship, and essentially how are Black students navigating racialized academic systems. I also looked at students from the University of Nairobi, where they primarily focused on sort of economic survival, graduate unemployment, and mindset resets regarding cultural and emotional vulnerability. So what was really common in terms of the two groups was that they really needed people to move from a passive concept of sort of counseling to more active and identity rooted stewardship, which I thought was interesting because I think one of the things we may assume is that, well, if you're in a predominantly Black space, you may not need to really think about how identity informs your experiences, but recognizing that even within predominantly Black spaces, there are different cultural groups, there are different tribal groups, different religious groups. The identity piece really did cut across both populations. So when I looked at what was going on within the Ontario context, a lot of the mentorship that the folks were looking at was really about a response to racism. Right, because when we think of the way in which Black students experience these spaces, many of them have talked about the ongoing marginalization in those spaces, the lack of access to direction and resources and career development. So for them, they saw mentoring as a tool for countering anti-Black racism and systemic invisibility. Because again, so many of the students in some situations, they're one of a few students in their department, or they might be the only student in their department. Um, and so there's this constant sense of being an outsider in those spaces. The other thing that emerged very consistently amongst the students, um, and this concept of positive Black racial identity and how important that became for them because it really acted as a protective shield. I'm currently doing some research on suicide amongst Black youth and young adults. And a piece that is coming up extremely consistently, which is also extremely troubling and problematic for me, is the extent to which racism is really negatively impacting the experiences of our students to the point where it becomes so wearing on them that they're almost constantly stuck in survival mode. And I've often argued that if our students are focused on survival, it's very difficult for them to live. It's very difficult for them to build. So it became really important to look at intentionally cultivating what I refer to as a positive Black racial identity, which I articulate differently from a Black identity, because oftentimes what we're seeing is that the young people who develop what they think it means to be Black, they're really drawing from a lot of the stereotypical ideas that are presented in the media, which is not having a really positive impact for them. So, what I am seeing is that for the young people who have had the supports that allow for them to develop a really grounded sense of who they are as as Black people, that is having a significant impact on their sense of self, how they navigate space, and as well what they think that they're even capable of doing. So for the Ontario context, um, the students also felt that it was so important to look at how do we shift the conversation away from the individual and look at the institutional responsibility for Black excellence. Because when we look at racism, racism is structural, it's embedded in the system. But when we talk about addressing racism, we often want to individualize it. And what the young people are saying is that that notion of individualizing the impact of racism or healing from racism essentially becomes another form of the Black tax that they're already carrying, right? So they're expected to do this extra work to become successful when the system is really stacked against facilitating their success. When we looked at the Kenya context, they talked about the idea of, real mentorship, right? Whereby they really wanted people who could actively engage with them in terms of skill building, developing businesses, digital innovation. So people who could really, as they say, walk the walk and talk the talk. They also thought that mentors were really important in terms of helping them cross lines in terms of their ethnic identities. So, again, recognizing that even within predominantly Black spaces or all Black spaces, there are still ethnic differences. They thought that it would be important for mentors to help them to break those differences or to bridge those gaps between the different ethnic and cultural groups. And not just sort of within the space, but how could the mentor also support them in terms of pursuing global opportunities, right? So they were seeing mentors as being sort of very active in sort of breaking down the walls that were sometimes limiting to them. And also recognizing that mentors could facilitate a sort of a cultural reset. So if we think of the way in which we get the messages, what are men allowed to do, what are women allowed to do, what they were saying is that by having access to mentors, they're able to get different messages about masculinity, femininity, the roles of men, the roles of women. So the mentor can really open up possibilities for them in multiple contexts, both locally and globally. Where we saw an alignment in terms of both data sets is specifically with regards to the identity piece, that all of the participants really thought that a mentor needed to help them sort of come to understand who they are in multiple contexts. And I know that there's a lot of dialogue around race matching in some of these contexts. And I was giving a talk a while back, and I remember a member of the audience saying that she gets upset if clients call in, and this was not mentorship, this was more mental health. She gets upset and she doesn't think it's fair that if a Black person calls in and requests a Black um, clinician, because it makes her feel as though her skills aren't valid or that what she has to offer isn't valid. And I remember saying to her, but therein lies the problem that you've made it about you. Someone is calling in and they're saying that they're needing mental health supports and they're not wanting to have to do the additional work of educating the therapist about what life is like as a Black person. And instead of you understanding that this identity piece is so important, you've made it about you as an individual, right? Um, so what the young people are saying is that having people in place who they don't have to explain to them some of the struggles and the challenges that they're experiencing becomes important in some mentoring contexts. And I'll explain that a bit more in my upcoming slide. The other piece that they talked about was the notion of safety, right? And that so many of them are afraid of how their bodies are read, how their interactions are understood in the classroom. And part of having a mentor helps them to overcome some of that fear of being judged and fear of how they're perceived in multiple contexts. Again, using a very concrete example, I think of one of my students who reached out to me. She was part of a group that had to do an assignment for one of her classes, and this was in a graduate program. And when she logged into the call, the other participants didn't realize that she was already on the call. And she overheard them talking about they didn't want to work with her. She doesn't speak English clearly. And as far as they know, the Black students, they're not as strong as the non-Black students. So they didn't really want to work with her. And then when they realized that by this time she had logged into the call, all of a sudden they started backtracking. But what that experience sort of confirmed for her was that sense of constantly being judged by those societal notions of Blackness, experiencing anti-Blackness in that moment. And I think for her, the fact that she was able to reach out to me as a mentor to talk through how can you navigate this piece and this interaction and this experience was so important and so validating for her. And I think of, well, what would have happened if she didn't have that support in place? The other piece that where the data really intersected well was in terms of mobility and the idea that a mentor can be an architect for building out their future, which also then leads into effective academic planning, effective career planning, and sort of long-term social standing and social planning in terms of their future options and opportunities. So I really wanted to sort of think through this model as of looking at holistic mentorship, looking at cultural stewardship, where they're supporting people in building that solid identity foundation through racial and cultural affirmation, looking at the relational accompanier, whereby the person is able to provide them some level of emotional safety and protection, that they have somebody they can go to. Um, so in terms of the cultural steward and the relational accompanier, this is where the students were much more insistent that having a Black person in those contexts would be important because then they don't have to do the additional work of explaining to someone what is life like as a Black person within a Canadian or even a Kenyan context. Um, the navigational strategist and the professional exemplar, these were spaces where they were much more open to having non-Black mentorship because really the navigational strategist was providing them with tools, supporting them in terms of how to navigate systems, how to get access to different benefits or opportunities within the system. So even though within the Ontario context, the students were saying they would still have liked to have a Black mentor in those situations, what they were very clear in stating was that that person did not have to be Black, right? It was simply someone who was willing to help them navigate the various spaces. And then the professional exemplar. So this one sort of fell into two categories whereby they didn't necessarily need someone who was Black, but they need someone who understood equity issues, right? So what does the hidden curriculum look like? How are marginalized groups impacted by various forms of oppression? How are they allowed in or prevented from having access? So in this context, again, even though they would have preferred to have someone who would be Black, they were very clearly stating that they wanted someone who got it. And it didn't have to be a Black person. So I wanted to just sort of look at the navigational strategist here for a second. So the idea was that this person would help them to move from gatekeeping to opportunity, right? So in this context, they're not looking at someone who was just going to sort of tell them, well, here's as far as you can go. Here are the options. And if I think back to some of the other data that I've collected, whereby Black students have talked about the way in which guidance counselors have really limited the options that are made available to them. And in effect, that guidance counselor becomes a gatekeeper for a lot of Black students who've talked about the guidance counselor saying things to them like, well, yeah, you've got good grades, but maybe you should just go to college and get a job because it's easier. Or maybe you should just do X, Y, or Z. But there was never this sensibility that the guidance counselor was really open to supporting them in terms of exploring opportunities outside of those stereotypical boundaries. So the navigational strategist really was someone who could understand the systems, understand how the systems work, and really walk alongside these young people in terms of helping them to navigate the systems, and also understanding the politics of the academy. Again, really simple example. Two of my mentees reached out to me in the past week. They're taking a graduate course, and there's been some chatter online in this WhatsApp group about one of the other instructors, and they're wondering how should they step in, how should they intervene. And my response to them was, it's none of your business. Stay out of it, right? And that may not sound like a big deal, but what we often see happening is that in these spaces, they're almost these cliques that develop, and it often becomes Black students versus other students. And I said to them, this is not the hill to die on, right? You got to leave this one alone. So when we talk about academic politics, that becomes an example. In Kenya, conversely, the role of the navigational strategist is helping them to navigate the job market, understanding different types of forms of entrepreneurship, and as well navigating overseas applications, because a lot of students, again, see Canada or the US as potential opportunities to study abroad. And so what they were saying is that the role of the navigational strategist was really about helping them to navigate those pieces, writing reference letters for them, helping them to understand the different systems in different parts of the globe. So when I pulled all the data together, because I thought, okay, well, what is this understanding of mentorship that's emerging out of the data that I have? And what the young people were saying is that mentorship is a reciprocal and holistic relationship designed to empower students to navigate both institutional systems and personal life transitions. They also saw it as a process of stewardship where a more experienced guide can provide them not only with academic or career-based knowledge, but also navigational capital and emotional accompaniment. Crucially, in both contexts, mentorship serves as a protective moderator, utilizing positive racial and cultural identity to build resilience against systemic exclusion, economic instability, and mental health challenges. So, one of the things that actually was surprising to me, and this emerged out of the Kenyan data set specifically, was that mentors can also help them to navigate the mental health challenges, and they specifically referenced suicide. That having a mentor and having someone to turn to who can help them understand the job market, which becomes a significant source of stress for many of the students in Kenya, or even navigating those academic space, again, significant source of stress, that having a mentor available also help them address suicidal ideation. So again, I'm not developing that piece really that much in this context, but I thought it was an interesting piece that emerged given that I've been doing data on suicide as well. So what are the four key pillars of mentorship that's emerged out of my data? Well, holistic stewardship, that the mentor really needs to work with the whole person. And this is where the young people are saying, if you can't acknowledge my blackness, if you can't acknowledge that I live a different life from you, if you can't understand what it's like to be a black person, it means that you're really not seeing me as a whole person, right? And I even think of in terms of my journey through academia as a student, having people tell me that they didn't see me as black. They just saw me as Beverly. Well, what does that mean? Because it means that you've now severed a significant portion of my identity. And if you're severing my identity, how are you going to uh, support me in terms of effectively navigating spaces when my navigational path and trajectory is going to be different from yours? I even think of sort of in my career path when I have encountered racism or when I have encountered misogynoir, right? And I remember someone in a leadership position a few years ago telling me, "I want to see you succeed." And even as I say it now, I'm still in shock because I had to remind this person that last time I checked, I was already successful, right? So I really didn't need you to sort of co-sign my success. So as I am navigating racism in academia, I have to step aside and find my mentors. I have to send emails. I have to make phone calls and say, okay, this has happened. How do you think I need to frame this email? What do you think my response should be? Right. Uh, so I think for a lot of people, there might be this assumption that the mentorship may end, particularly in academia, once we get to certain positions. But when I think of so many colleagues that I am aware of who have either left academia or stepped down from roles because of the level of racism that they're experiencing, if someone doesn't understand that race and racism plays a central part in terms of our journey through this world, they're not able to really bring that holistic sort of stewardship to the table. The other piece was the importance of identity affirmation, right? That we needed to really support young people in terms of coming to understand their racial and cultural identity in healthy and holistic ways so that when they did experience challenges, that those challenges did not reinforce the societal negative conceptions of Blackness, but rather that the identity became a very protective factor. And I remember well, one comment by one of my former mentees where she said that she learned to love the skin that she's in. And I actually wrote a paper with that title. I learned to love the skin that I'm in and how important that identity piece was for her. Or another person who talks about having that solid Black identity helps you to challenge the stereotypes. But if all that you're exposed to are these negative ideations around Blackness, if you don't have a mentor who can really support you in terms of challenging those social constructions, then it's not as effective of a process. Then there was this sort of again the navigation and the survival capital. Hey, there's a scholarship coming up. Hey, by the way, there's a conference coming. By the way, did you want to submit something for that conference? People who will say, well, I need RAs to work with me. Why don't you come and become my RA or become my TA? So all of those pieces were also important, and then sort of connected to how they survived the spaces of academia. And again, the last piece sort of relational and psychosocial support, right? I think of the number of young people who have had come up to me in tears, and they just needed that safe space where they could talk about what they were experiencing and not be worried about being judged about it. Because one of the things that myself and other Black academics and specifically Black female academics talk about is this idea that we're not allowed to cry as Black women, right? So if things get complicated or difficult at work, whereas other groups have the privilege of crying, if we cry in those spaces, it it's read very differently, right? So I think of one woman, for example, who talked about it got so bad at work that she broke down at work, and rather than getting help for her, they called an ambulance. And the ambulance then took her to the hospital and they wanted to admit her into the psych ward. Right. So where other groups have the option to cry, that is an option that is often denied of us, particularly as Black women in academic spaces. Right. So mentorship also becomes a form of psychosocial support for us, where we're able to cry in private and that people aren't thinking that we've completely lost our minds. Um, so in terms of where I see the synergies between these pieces, um, the there's sort of the idea of mentorship allowing people to understand who am I, right? So I am because of my identity, my culture, and how does a mentor facilitate that stewardship? I am safe. That becomes a really important aspect of mentorship. The notion of I can't, right? I can do, I can become, I can. So even when I think of, again, if I use an example of a young woman that I've been mentoring now for a number of years, when I first met her, she just wanted to finish college. That was it. Miss, I just need to get my diploma and get out of here. But this is the same young woman who is now applying for her PhD, right? So that notion of navigational strategist becomes really, really important in terms of opening up possibilities so that they can see that they're able to enter these various spaces. And finally, I will become that they're able to develop a sense of vision, a sense of possibility, future orientation, and future planning in terms of their overall life process and life goals, right? So when I think of sort of how this all unfolds, the your identity and how you conceptualize of your identity has an impact on the relationships that you engage in. If you're able to develop safe relationships with your mentors, it also has an impact on the navigational strategies that you have access to or you're willing to try. What you are exposed to in terms of navigating those spaces also then has an impact on your identity. So it really is a bit of a cyclical process, right? The more solid your identity, the safer you feel in the relationships. The safer you feel in the relationships, the more exploration that you're able to do. Almost like when we talk about the developmental phases of children, and children who are more securely attached to their parents are better able to navigate away from their parents or to take chances away from their parents because there's that solid foundation that they know they don't that parents are there for them, which then of course influences how that child comes to know themselves. So it's a similar sort of cycle that I'm seeing in terms of the data from these two contexts. So what are the recommendations? Matching matters, right? So we have to look at, are there ways in which we may want to think of mentorship as sort of a multi-stage process whereby people require different mentors at different stages in their lives. So when these young people, let's say they're now starting off, whether it's college or university, what they may need at that point would be a racially matched mentor so that they can really become more solid in terms of their racial and cultural identities in an academic space and what that looks like. Because what the existing data shows is that students who have a solid racial identity tend to do better academically, right? So perhaps foundationally, we may look at how might we do that racial matching in the early years so that we're preparing them for longer term success, as opposed to giving them a more generalized, more research resource mentor at the beginning, but they may not have fully come to understand and appreciate their academic capacities to allow for them to effectively navigate the space. Resource access, ensuring that there are supports in place to address the needs of the students. Right. So it's one thing, and I see that a lot of institutions now are implementing Black student centers and, Black this and Black that. And the question that I keep asking is, and how are you measuring success? Right? Are you ensuring that the people who are staffing those centers have the credentials, the expertise that they need to support the students? Are you ensuring that whether it's the workshops or whether it's counseling, are you ensuring that the students have access to the actual resources that they need, or are you creating these quote unquote Black spaces, but you're not effectively resourcing it so that when the students don't do well, the institution can essentially say, well, we gave them what they needed, right? So not only do we need to look at the resources, but we need to ensure that those resources are actually what the students need versus what the institution thinks the students need. And then the last piece, really institutionalizing the work, right? So I've been talking about moving beyond culturally affirming approaches to really looking at racially affirming models of care, which can be implemented in different settings, including in the context of mentorship. So what I mean by racially affirming care is ensuring that the form of care that you're providing is grounded in an understanding of the person's racial identity, right? Um, and the reason I've been moving away from culturally affirming models is I make the argument that everybody actually loves Black culture, whether it's our dress, our styles, um, our cultural norms, our food. People love to tell us that they love those things. It's Black bodies that people are uncomfortable with. So if we're not able to support these young people in terms of really becoming solid and grounded in their racial identity, then we're not providing them with the level of support and engagement that they need. Now, someone can easily say, well, shouldn't the parents be responsible for helping them develop that racial identity? And I will say to you, absolutely yes. But our kids spend more time in in society. They spend more time away from parents than they do with parents. And I'm sure anyone here who's a parent can tell you, I told the kid X, but he went off and did Y. But what my research is also showing is that there's a very gendered difference um, when we look at the impact of family. So when I have asked for young people to tell me sort of their sort of sources or sites of influence for females, the family tends to be number one. Their friendship group tends to be number two, and societal messages tends to be number three. For Black males, conversely, societal messages tends to be number one, the peer group tends to be number two, and parents number three. So even when we're thinking of implementing mentorship models, we really also have to factor in the gendered component of it, given that the females are experiencing society differently than the males. So, what I had done in the Bridge program is I would have a series of integrated workshops where we would talk about general pieces, but then I would also have the Circle of Queens and the Circle of Kings, whereby the female identified students would be able to address issues that they thought were relevant to being female, and the males were able to do the same thing. And I really found that model worked quite well, right? So by way of conclusion, mentorship acts as a bridge that can really convert identity into influence, because the more solid that they become in terms of understanding who I am, i.e., the identity piece, the more solid they are in terms of navigating various spaces that they enter. Mentorship becomes a fundamental social determinant of success, and I would argue of overall sense of well-being, particularly in academic spaces. It acts as a protective shield, and if done right, the person's race and culture becomes a source of wealth and identity affirmation. Mentorship has to be intentional and strategic with tangible outcomes, right? So it's not just about let's talk, it's about, um, and again, I've done this with my young people. Okay, on this date, we're going to be working on scholarship applications. So when you come to the session, I want you to already have identified one or two scholarships that you are interested in applying for. I want you to have a sense of what the requirements are for those scholarships. And as well, I want you to have drafted an initial letter so that we can work on it. So again, very concrete and tangible pieces. And finally, I believe that effective mentorship can produce a new generation of leaders who are really focused on fostering societal change. Okay. And with that, I say thank you. And are there any questions or comments?
Thank you, Beverly. I had high expectations for this, and you absolutely delivered on those expectations. So many powerful points. And what I
Good.
love about your work is the language that you use, and you talk the talk and you walk the walk. It's very evident that you support so many young people across Canada in the work that you do.
Thank
So thank you again for your time and your dedication to supporting, this work.
and it's those moments, right? I'm in my kitchen making dinner yesterday and I get a text. Um, Hi, Miss, this is so and so. I just wanted you to know that I have become a police detective now, right?
Nice.
I get those pieces, or I get the pictures when they've purchased their first home, right? When they've moved on to a new job, or when they're contemplating another career pathway. And I get these text messages, these emails. Miss, what do you think about X, right? And some of them threaten me. Um, you will never lose me. Like I am never going away. So it's very rewarding work. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak to it.
No problem. Does anyone have any questions for Beverly? You can come off mute and ask them or put them in the chat. I know people have come on, they've turned their cameras on, so I'm assuming they have questions, but yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Daniel.
Hey, good.
Hi. Actually, I had a couple of questions. I missed 2 points that you were talking about, and I really wanted to go back to them. The first one was an example of how two mentees came to you as their mentor, and they were really upset by something I think that was maybe happening in class,
Mhm.
and you advise them, stay out of it. That's not the hill you want to die on. But I didn't quite catch what was the issue.
So one of the the interesting things that we've seen happening in the graduate programs, so the students they set up these WhatsApp groups, right? Which technically could be a good thing, but they sometimes use those WhatsApp groups to start, you know, bugging other people, or just
Hmm.
it becomes a site of complaints,
Right.
and not so sometimes not used as a proactive space. So two of my mentees, they're part of that WhatsApp group and reached out to me saying, hey, people are talking about X, right? And my response to them was, that has nothing to do with you.
Hmm.
Don't Don't thumbs up it. Don't heart it. Nothing. Don't touch it.
Right.
It
Okay.
has nothing to do with you, right? So what we're finding is sometimes there's so much energy that gets put into, the silliness that happens in those WhatsApp groups, right? But I also then think of if these two women didn't have me to come to, chances are they would have waded into the conversation,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And then what we've seen over the years is that when things start becoming tense, you see a racial divide.
Hmm.
in terms of how the classroom unfolds, right? So for me to be able to say to them, this has nothing to do with you. This is not your problem. It's not your business. Step out of it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's now done. So whatever is still happening has nothing to do with them. Focus on your stuff.
Yeah. That's probably good advice for lots of online stuff.
Listen.
Yeah. And my other quick one was the difference between boys and girls, men and women,
Mhm.
and their influences. Girls and boys in your research have shown that boys are much more influenced by societal norms,
Yes.
whereas girls, and then I just missed the list.
Yes.
So sort of a two-parter. What was that list and how is it different? And is there any, what, do you have any idea what the reason for the difference is?
So when we look at, and I'm going to ground this in terms of Black community and Black histories, right? So what we know is that women tend to stay closer to the family, right? There's that family, you know, the women tend to communicate, connect, right? So what I'm seeing in my research is that when it comes to who are the women taking advice from, other women, right? So the family for young black well, for black women in general plays a more central role in terms of guiding their careers, their choices, their pathways, right? Whereas for the males, and there's the whole sort of patriarchal pieces, right? Um, what they're turning to is what is society telling them that it means to be male. The closest I can come to um, sort of mainstream similarity to that is what we're seeing in terms of the incels,
Mm,
right?
yep.
So society is giving them these messages about what it means to be male, what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine. And even though the family itself might be giving them different messages, they're really getting sucked into these societal messages with regards to what it means to really be a man, right? So I'm seeing a similar pattern in terms of the black males, whereby they're the societal messages it's number one, right? Which helps us to understand why we then see so many black males being pushed into basketball and sports and performance, right? Because that's what society is telling them that they're supposed to be.
Right.
The second group is their peer group, which again makes perfect sense, right? Because the peer group for both males and females is number two.
Same.
For the females, societal messages is number three. And for the boys, or the young men, the family is number three. And if you sort of look at their trajectories, what you tend to see is that there's often a higher percentage of females attending post-secondary schooling because the males are typically streamed into sports and performance, right? Which is even coming from the guidance counselors. Well, why would you want to do that when you could play basketball? Um, and I think of a young man who was in my graduate class a number of years ago, and he was missing classes for basketball. And I said to him, do you really think this institution is invested in you? Right? Or are they simply invested in you performing the male stereotype of physicality? Right? Well, of course, when he looks at me, he sees mom, right? So me saying, buddy, what are you doing here? He's not paying attention to what I'm telling him. What eventually happened is he had to be dropped out of the program,
Mm.
right? And so to get to the level of masters and to still then drop out of the program because so much of your time was spent on sports related. And again, I'm not minimizing the benefits of sports or any of those pieces, but what I'm saying is that we have to find a balance between the two. So I
Yeah,
hope that answers your question, Joe.
it does. Thank you very much.
Most welcome. Folks, any other questions?
We have a question in the chat. When mentoring happens in groups rather than pairs, what practices help ensure conversations about culture, identity, and lived experience are supported safely without putting pressure on participants to educate or represent?
Okay. So the Bridge program is specifically for Black students, right? It is not an integrated group, a racially integrated group. It's specifically for Black students. And one of the first things that I do, like the first couple of weeks, because we do have a series of workshops that we do, and those first foundational weeks, we really do talk about race and racism and helping them to understand what racism looks like. Because what is interesting, folks, and this may sound very surprising to those of you who may not be part of the Black community, many of our kids feel that something is wrong, but they're not often aware of what that thing is, right? They can't often name it. So what then happens is that they spend time really internalizing the challenges. Well, it must be me. I'm the one who can't. I must be doing something wrong. Um, so that those racial identity pieces are sort of spoken to at the start in terms of helping them to understand the historical, the systemic, and the institutional manifestations of racism. And it's interesting how it becomes an aha moment for them, right? It almost becomes so wait a minute, you mean I can succeed? Because all my life I've heard that I can't. But you're telling me that I can succeed? This is weird. There was a really interesting process whereby when I first started the program, the what actually pushed me to start the program was the fact that as a program coordinator, I noticed one semester that there were 20 students who were listed for being withdrawn from the program. 18 of them were Black. And I thought, holy crap, this is a crack. I need to look into this. Um, so the majority of students who were being withdrawn from post-secondary spaces turned out to be Black students, right? Um, and in my silly brain, I thought, well, hey, if you've made it to the post-secondary level, you must have learned how to navigate the system. But logic should have told me that if you were underprepared in high school because of racism, it meant that by the time you got to post-secondary institution, there would be learning gaps, right? There would be skills gaps that we needed to look at. Um, so as I started working with the students over the years, I also kept collecting data. And what the data showed was that the students who were involved in the Bridge program had a higher academic GPA than all the students at the college, and also a higher GPA than Black students who did not participate in the Bridge program. So what we started seeing literally within about 2 years of running the program is the Black students were now showing up on the honor roll. They were getting scholarships, they were going on to university, they were staying at the college and finishing degrees. What that then led to was a significant backlash, right? So the white students, a group of white students, let me not say also, a group of white students started protesting, right? Started writing letters to the president, saying that I should be fired because I was padding the grades for the students, because N words could never be that bright, um, that if I wanted to help people, I should go back to my home and help them. Like it got so nasty that we had to have the hate crimes unit involved. They had to have security to escort me to my vehicle if ever I'm on campus late. And it was interesting for me that people had become so attuned to this notion that Black students aren't academically gifted or capable, that when the Black students started living up to their potential because they had a safe foundation to launch from, all of a sudden people were threatened by it, right? So the issue is not if Black students can, it's they absolutely can when given the proper care, the proper guidance, the proper mentorship. And really that's what my research um, has looked at in various capacities, right? So I hope that answers the question. I think it did. I hope so.
Uh, Dr. Daniel, we are at the top of the hour, so unfortunately, I think we have to end today's conversation just to respect folks' time. But again, thank you so much for coming and spending your
Sure.
time with us and sharing your wisdom. And thank you to all of you who decided to come and have a conversation with all of us. These are always one of the best parts of my month, really, when they happen. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Have a wonderful afternoon, folks. Bye-bye.